The Galactic Cooperative Transit Station Sigma-7 had processed 11 million passengers in its 200-year operational history. It had seen diplomats, merchants, refugees, pilgrims, warriors, and saints pass through its pressurized corridors. It had weathered solar flares, micrometeorite impacts, and the occasional smuggling crisis. Its translation matrix, governed by the station AI designated AX-9, had never once failed. Until the morning Mara Ellison arrived. She came off the shuttle from Earth like everything else from that planet came into the galaxy, loud, alive, and completely unaware that the universe had not been designed with her in mind. Mara Ellison was 22 years old, a cadet in the Terran Exploratory Corps, and the only human on a station of 463 alien species. She stood at a height that most Velthrian merchants considered aggressive, with shoulders that the Praxan security officers quietly noted were wider than regulation corridors suggested was comfortable. She had grown up in the coastal mountain ranges of New Zealand, a place where the oceans were violent, the weather was violent, and even the birds had historically committed violence upon unwary settlers. She had been raised in one of the most geologically active zones on a planet that scientists from 17 other civilizations had formally classified as a Deathworld, Category 4. She was, by galactic standards, an apex predator who had not yet been informed that she was supposed to act like one. AX-9 had been monitoring her since docking. The AI's language core was a masterpiece of xenolinguistics, a self-evolving neural lattice capable of processing and translating 11,409 active galactic languages in real time, including 17 dialects of Praxan throat song and the notoriously untranslatable emotional humidity language of the Delvori, which was communicated entirely through changes in skin moisture. AX-9 had translated treaties, confessions, marriage proposals, and a legal dispute that lasted 47 years and concerned a single misplaced apostrophe. The AI was, in its own quiet and confident way, the most sophisticated communication system in this quadrant of known space. AX-9 watched Mara Ellison walk through the main concourse and quietly ran a standard biological profile. The results flagged 17 anomalies. The AI added a soft observation note to her file: structural musculature density exceeds Terran average by 34%. Recommend monitoring. Mara did not know she was being monitored. She was too busy being hungry. The concourse food hall was a marvel of interspecies cuisine, a long, curving avenue of vendor stalls offering everything from the crystallized mineral cakes favored by the silicon to the living bioluminescent soups of the Marathi Deep. AX-9 automatically activated the customer translation interface as Mara approached the first stall, a Velthrian noodle vapor stand operated by a 7-limbed vendor named, in rough translation, he who smells correctly of fermentation. The Velthrian addressed Mara in a series of rapid, high-frequency clicks and low-tonal hums. AX-9 translated smoothly into Mara's earpiece, "Greetings, traveler. Today's special is sorrow noodle with memory broth. It is considered impolite to enjoy it too enthusiastically." Mara blinked. "Right," she said. "I'll just have whatever's least likely to make me cry, I think." AX-9 translated her words into Velthrian for the vendor. The exchange proceeded normally. But then Mara moved on. And then things began, in the understated phrasing that would later appear in AX-9's incident report, to develop. The problem started at stall 44, a Grathani protein exchange booth, where a misunderstanding about exchange rates led to Mara accidentally offering to trade her entire life savings for what she believed was a spiced protein bar but was actually a ceremonial betrothal token. AX-9 intervened quickly, smoothly inserting a correction that de-escalated the situation before the Grathani vendor could call his 3 legally recognized spouses to come witness the oath. The second problem arose at stall 61, where a Praxan child asked Mara, in perfectly translated standard, if she was a warrior of the soft world. Mara crouched down to the child's eye level, AX-9 noted, unusual behavioral adaptation for dominant apex species, and said, "I'm a cadet. That means I'm still learning." The Praxan child stared at her for a long moment and then, without explanation, began to weep with what AX9's emotional context module identified as reverent awe. The AI filed this under cultural anomaly, low priority, and moved on. The real crisis arrived at exactly 14:32 station time, at Corridor Junction 7G, where the diplomatic wing met the civilian transit hub. A delegation of Savari ambassadors, tall, multi-jointed beings whose communication relied on precise subsonic resonance layered over ultrasonic harmonics, had become involved in a heated territorial negotiation with a group of Marathi trade representatives. The situation had been escalating for 3 hours. AX9 had been managing the translation with careful, surgical precision, threading nuance between two species whose languages had almost no conceptual overlap. One wrong translation could trigger a diplomatic incident. 2 wrong translations could trigger a trade embargo. 3 could, theoretically, restart a conflict that had been dormant for 60 years. AX9 was managing it beautifully. And then Mara Ellison walked around the corner, saw a crowd gathered in obvious tension, and did what humans from Deathworld environments instinctively do when they perceive a threat dynamic that no one appears to be resolving. She intervened. "Hey," she shouted. The sound that came out of Mara Ellison's mouth was, AX9 would calculate afterward, approximately 118 decibels at point of origin, equivalent to a chainsaw at 1 meter, or a small aircraft engine at close range. In the enclosed acoustics of Corridor Junction 7G, the reflected and amplified measurement peaked at 122 decibels. On Earth, this would have been a loud shout. On Earth, human vocal anatomy was adapted for exactly this, cutting through wind, water, predator noise, the crash of surf on volcanic coastline, and the screaming of one's own heartbeat in moments of survival-critical communication. On Station Sigma 7, in an environment calibrated for the auditory sensitivity of 11 species whose hearing ranges extended well into frequencies humans could not produce and whose pain thresholds for sound exposure were a fraction of the Terran average, 122 decibels was something else entirely. The Savari ambassadors experienced it as a physical shockwave that temporarily disrupted their subsonic communication organs. The Marathi representatives, whose bioluminescent nervous systems were partially photosensitive and who perceived sound as light, saw a flash of blinding white. The 12 bystanders of various species in the corridor collectively experienced something their respective languages would later describe as the moment before thunder, the voice of a tectonic event, and, from the single Delvori present, a moisture event of profound emotional complexity. AX9's acoustic management systems registered the input, attempted to process it as communication, flagged it simultaneously as emergency alert, biological weapon discharge, cultural greeting, distress signal, and mating call in 6 different species frameworks, ran 17 contextual analyses in 0.003 seconds, failed to reach consensus, and crashed. The language core went offline. For the first time in 200 years, all translations stopped. The corridor went completely, utterly silent. Mara stood in the center of it, looking at the frozen crowd, at the stunned Savari whose jointed limbs had locked in what she recognized, from her core training, as a fear paralysis response, and at the Marathi representatives who had dimmed to a deep, confused indigo. She looked at all of them. And then she did something that AX9, rebooting its secondary systems, would spend considerable processing power analyzing in the weeks that followed. She held up both hands, palms out, the oldest human gesture of non-aggression, older than language, older than fire, and she said, slowly and clearly, in a voice stripped of volume and full of something that needed no translation. "It's okay. I've got you. Nobody's going to get hurt." She didn't know if anyone understood the words. She said them anyway. And something in the posture, in the stillness, in the steady brown eyes of a young woman from a world that had spent 4 billion years trying to kill everything that lived on it and had instead produced something that walked toward danger with its hands open, something communicated. The Savari lead ambassador slowly, carefully, unlocked its limbs. The Marathi representatives shifted from indigo toward a cautious, questioning amber. The corridor breathed again. When AX9 came back online 47 seconds later, it found Mara Ellison seated cross-legged on the floor, with the Savari delegation arranged in a loose semicircle around her and a Marathi representative carefully, tentatively, resting one luminescent tendril against her knee, a gesture that AX9's freshly restored cultural database identified as "I am choosing to trust you, stranger, though I do not know why." The AI filed an incident report. Under root cause, it typed, "Human vocal output exceeded acoustic tolerance parameters." Then it paused. It deleted that line. It typed instead, "Human presence exceeded expected parameters." Effects, ongoing. AX9 had translated 11 million conversations. It had never before encountered a communication that required no translation at all. It added one final line to the report, in a notation field it had never used before, a field labeled personal observation. She said, "I've got you." And they believed her. I find that I do not have a language category for what that is. I am creating one now.